Hello, everyone. Welcome to another update from SES, Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling. This is a status update where we give different updates about what we're doing, or sometimes we discuss topics that we believe that are important for the DAO and the larger community. Today we have Wouter that's going to be talking about breaking the Dunbar Barrier at MakerDAO. This is a talk that was quite well received in Amsterdam in one of the larger events a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I believe he modified it a bit for today, but we can definitely discuss about this and go through questions either if you have them during the talk or at the end. We'll also have time for that. So if you do, don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A box. Yeah, without further ado, Wouter.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. And I didn't just modify it a bit because the presentation at the ETH Amsterdam event was for a much more newbie audience, I believe, than today. So this really is part two, and it's a little bit more laid back than usual. Basically, I want to take a few steps back and think about which kind of high-level principles we should follow if we want to break through that Dunbar barrier. So as MakerDAO is growing, we are quickly approaching the size where not every individual can keep up with every other individual anymore, and we create these information silos. So how do we deal with that? Which kind of high-level principles could we follow to help with that? So looking at the agenda, first I want to talk a little bit about parallel processing. This has to do with my own background in software engineering. I think that there are some interesting parallels, I guess, that we can see to think about parallel processing as what is happening in a DAO if it's when it's scaling up. And then, as I mentioned, there are a couple of high-level principles that I'd like to discuss. I don't think there's a lot of things new here. The idea is to reflect a little and see how we can push MakerDAO forward. So parallel processing. I pulled a quote from Wikipedia here. So in computer science, there's this understanding that when you go, for example, from one computer processor to parallel processing, that you can't keep things 100% efficient. So if you have a program that runs on a single processor and you run the program then on two processors, you can never gain full efficiency. So the time that it takes for the program to finish will never be exactly 50%. It will always be lower because you always have communication overhead and things like that. So I think we're seeing a very similar phenomenon in the DAO, and this phenomenon is known as parallel slowdown. And Wikipedia writes, parallel slowdown occurs when the algorithm requires significant communication, particularly of intermediate results. And some problems known as embarrassingly parallel problems do not require such communication, and thus they are not affected by slowdown. There aren't many of those problems, and typically they're the very practical things we're trying to achieve. They don't fall into those categories. You do see that as you add more processors, it becomes harder and harder to maintain high efficiencies. But examples of processes that are very well parallelizable are brute force searches, because you can give an algorithm a very easy target. You're searching for something specific, and then you fire off 100 different threads that can search in their own space. And when any one of those finds the result, they will come back. So that is a very efficient process. Many things from biology, so genetic algorithms, neural networks, these are by nature parallelizable because This is also how it happens in the real world, of course. Many of you will think of GPUs, graphics processor units, when thinking about parallelization. So that is another area where there was a lot of improvement in how graphics can be rendered in parallel. When your computer screen is rendered for a game, it requires a lot of complicated algorithms to make sure that every pixel can be computed as independently as possible from the others. And then you have things like local simulations. So those are, for example, weather phenomena. Maybe some of you are familiar with what is called the game of life, which is like a roster where every cell is receives a new value based on the cells that are adjacent to it. So it's very local, and because it's local and because it doesn't communicate with the wider environment, it's easily parallelizable. And then, of course, from the blockchain world, proof of work is a very nice example of an algorithm that was designed from the start to be parallelizable. So how does this all translate to people? Well, we see the exact same thing in teams. Every team member is, as it were, a parallel processor, and we can see the same effects. So if we are increasing the number of team members in a team, increasing the number of processors in the group, then we see that the efficiency will go down very quickly. So two people cannot reduce the time to complete something to 50% perfectly, because there is at least a minimal communication overhead. There are many discussions about what is the most optimal team size, and it really depends on a lot of different things. But the rule of thumb is that it's lower than people typically think. So this one here shows maybe an optimal team size of 4 or 5. That's maybe a little low in some situations, but it's really whether it's software engineering or just project management, or I'm personally not aware of any professional area that can have teams that are easily scaled up beyond, let's say, 12 people in a team. Of course, you have bigger teams, but if they're more than 12 people, then what you will typically see is that they're really not a team. There are clusters in the team. They communicate in smaller groups rather than among the entire team. And of course, we know why this is, because if you are increasing the group size, this is the graph on the right, the number of social interactions, it increases exponentially or even faster. So if there are only 2 people in a team, there's only 1 person that you need to talk to. If there are 4 people in a team, then yeah, it goes up to 4 plus 2 plus 1. So it's really impossible to scale up the team size and still have efficient communication. And that's basically the barrier that we're running into here. The same process applies on higher levels. So you can make the same kind of reasoning about teams among each other. So if teams need to work together, for example, in a cross-core unit process, then there's like a maximum number of participants that can keep up to date with all the information that is shared. So parallel processing, the parallel slowdown happens due to information dependencies, communication overhead, which you can also see as an information transfer cost. And optimal performance really depends on the details of the problem. As we saw, there were some problems that can be parallelized very efficiently, but some not. And then it also depends very heavily on how you go about solving the problem. Many of the search algorithms, for example, that we mentioned, there are different versions of them. So a single thread search algorithm is a completely different implementation than one that uses parallel processing. And this is something to keep in mind. The processes that we use, the best practices, etc., that we use in a small team, they don't necessarily scale up. So we may need to change them really to make them more parallelizable. We need to organize work so that it reduces the number of dependencies between people and teams. We need to reduce, if there is a dependency, it's about an information transfer. So we need to reduce the information bandwidth. And if we have reduced the information bandwidth, so then we also need to make sure that whatever information is left, what we really have to communicate, that we communicate it in as efficient a manner as possible. So this is super high level, but I hope that it will serve as a little inspiration for the principles that I've laid out. So the first one is separation of concerns. And this one really is about removing those dependencies between the participants. So when people, or indeed computers, are working on a certain problem, we need to find the right kind of body of work, the right selection of tasks to be done, the right selection of problems to be worked on, so that the set of work or the set of problems is as independent as possible of other sets or works of problem or bodies of work. So the question here is really, how do we slice up the work? And one very typical and well-known trade-off that is always discussed a lot in organizations when they scale up is the difference between functional teams and product teams, because these are basically two ways of structuring the communication or the information transfers that are needed. So in an organization, typically, if you have certain professions, for example, you have front-end software developers. Well, front-end software developers in the organization, they should communicate with other front-end software developers in the same organization so that they can learn from each other, so that they can follow the same best practices, so that they can work in a way that is consistent, etc., etc. So maybe one way of organizing things might be to put all front-end software developers in the same team, but the problem there is that these developers also need to work with the product owner, with the designers, etc., on a particular product, and that's another way of grouping things. Is to say no, we will just have several multidisciplinary product teams. So this is a very typical example. So I think looking at the way how the DAO operates, the question we need to ask ourselves is if these the different concerns, these independent problems, are they optimally separated from each other? So for example, are core units maximally independent from each other? If there are core units that need to work together in almost every aspect, then probably that's a sign that the work hasn't been separated clearly enough. If a core unit has a particular mandate, it can also be that it's the opposite problem, that unnecessarily multiple independent buckets of work have been or multiple independent units of work have been put in the same bucket. And this is another exercise that we can do. We can actually scrutinize every core unit's mandate and ask ourselves, are there like independent tasks that this core unit is taking care of? And this is then an opportunity to scale up the DAO at a low cost by splitting up that core unit, because they're basically a team that isn't utilizing their internal communication capacity effectively. Another one that we can ask ourselves on the very highest level, on the DAO level itself, the protocol level, can MakerDAO be governed as completely separate business units? We know we have different products that are used by different types of users. Is there an opportunity there to optimize our scalability by really starting to separate these a lot more apart from each other? So, for example, the DAI stablecoin is a very different product from Maker Vaults, and yeah, there are many other aspects of the Maker protocol which constitute products that may be separated in different business units. So this is another one that we can look into. The way SES has been applying this principle in the past is we've tried to improve the separation of concerns at MakerDAO. So we've talked a lot about sandboxing, definitely in the beginning when SES was formed. So the idea of sandboxing is to parallelize smart contracts work, and indeed it's all about separation of concerns. So each team can be responsible for their own plugin module, and then communication between the plugin module and the protocol can be minimal, while the communication within the team building the module can be very intensive. Best example of that is the Deco core unit, which is implementing a completely separate piece of functionality that communicates through a gate contract with the protocol, reducing the information bandwidth in that connection. Another one is our advocacy around cross-core unit initiatives. The DAO not so long ago was in a state where it was still possible for the same group of people to continuously discuss and share information about the entirety of the roadmap. But this was really, this was really getting impractical, and this is why we created these different cross-core unit initiatives. So the L2 cross-core unit initiative, collateral management off-chain, collateral management off-chain, security, and then the last one that we kickstarted, the resilience improvement one. So the question there is, when we determine the scope of these cross-core unit initiatives, have we optimized for independence? And once we've made them independent, then we should also use that opportunity to have independent teams work on them. Is it how much communication is there needed between, let's say, the collateral management on-chain group and the collateral management off-chain group? Is there, if we want to scale up further, that would be a pretty easy one to further parallelize, because the two could work relatively independent of each other, as long as the common elements, the common processes are agreed on. Okay, the second principle is information abstraction. And this one is about when we do need to collaborate, and that's most of the time that's the case. Removing dependencies entirely is often impossible. Why? Because we're a very interdisciplinary field. We have this idea in the decentralized organization of separation of powers, and that's somewhat, it sounds similar, but it's actually quite opposite to separation of concerns, because it really depends on the different groups of people checking on each other. And when you need to check on someone else, that is a big communication overhead, because, for example, they need to report to you about their work, and then you need to communicate the feedback back to them. So that there's some contradiction there. And what we try to do, of course, is to improve alignment and accountability. But alignment is another example. If you want to get alignment, obviously you will need a lot of communication. So we can't completely just drop that. We need to rather look into how we can improve the information bandwidth that is needed. And then the other thing is just knowledge transfers around, for example, the technology we're using and training. So what is the steps that we can take to reduce information bandwidth? Question we should ask ourselves when we communicate, is the information packaged in its most effective format? Abstraction, ultimately, the question here is, can we reduce the data that is shared, and can we omit as much detail as possible without losing the really relevant information? And if we look at the different communications that are happening within the DAO, then we can ask ourselves, like, are they fully optimized for abstraction? So the communication that we have between core units and delegates, between core units internally, between delegates and MKR holders, which information is really needed between the two, which mental model is best suited to transfer that information, and can the format be standardized? For example, I think we talked about the cross-core unit initiatives. When we communicate between core units, it does help to use the same format and standard within the different cross-core unit initiatives. And why? Because if a core unit is participating in more than one cross-core unit initiative, then they will already know a lot of the context when they participate in the second one, because they already know it from the first one. The same with delegates. So if delegates want to follow up on different cross-core unit initiatives, then it is absolutely critical that there is a reporting format that talks to the questions that they want to see answered. This is one of the questions that we were struggling with, for example, when we look at the purpose of the GNR call. The governance and risk call has always been this somewhat awkward middle of a working meeting between core units to discuss present issues, but then also a little bit of a status reporting meeting to delegates. And yeah, so if these meetings have these different have multiple purposes, then we can't really find the right abstraction of the information to really communicate as effective as possible. So we need to standardize our formats, and we need to reuse the same, or we need to really find the right mental models that are needed to communicate with the right stakeholders. Possible improvements that I see today, I do think the meeting formats, for example, GNR that I mentioned, cross-core unit coordination, we are working on them, so it's working in progress, and I think they are improving, but we're not there yet. So we need to really nail this down. We need to find the right abstraction formats to communicate with different audiences and only communicate what is needed, and yeah, make this much more effective. Maker improvement proposals, they have been very successful in organizing how we work, but I've grown more and more concerned about how ineffective they are as an information and a communication tool. If you read any MIP and ask yourself, as a delegate, as another stakeholder, which information is really relevant for you, then we will find that there's a whole bunch of information that is probably not relevant, and the information that you do require may not even be there. So to ask that question critically for every type of MIP, whether, you know, which audience is this MIP supposed to talk to, which questions is the audience actually interested in, and have we optimized the format for this audience? Have we removed the details that are unnecessary, and have we made sure that all the details that are needed are included? So I think that that kind of analysis and almost maintenance of our communication infrastructure is what we needed if we want to scale up further as well. Related SES objectives. So the performance and dashboard API that we're working on is all about information abstraction. Reporting from core units to delegates is one of the most inefficient processes at the moment. Overhead is so high that it doesn't happen most of the time. So delegates are probably not aware of the roadmaps of the majority of core units, because it's just too much work to find the information, even though it's available. The right level of abstraction isn't available, so it could be that the roadmaps are too detailed or not detailed enough. Maybe they use technical terms that can't be understood by the audience, etc. So they just give up. So one place to collect all the performance data that should drastically reduce the evaluation of the work that is done by the core units. And yeah, we think that the dashboard will create a lot more room to scale up the DAO further. Another but very related aspect is our push for auditing and quality, an auditing and quality control function. So the activity of taking low-level information, for example, looking at the work output of a product development core unit or a support core unit or whichever core unit, but someone with the right expertise looking at that low information and then turning it into high-level information that can be understood by a broader audience, in other words, abstracting it. That is, it's a quick win in a sense, because that is one of those embarrassingly parallel problems. You can just you can ask a lot of people to just do exactly that, to look at the information that is available and summarize it in a way that is exactly optimized for the audience that needs it. And yeah, I think this is of course something that GovComms is doing a lot, but I do think this is too broad of a responsibility for a single core unit. It's also, it requires different areas of expertise. So this is one that I think will help a lot to scale up the DAO further as well. And of course, this is synergetic with the performance dashboard. It's really nice to have a performance dashboard, but if the right and the relevant data isn't inputted, then it's really not much use. So to have people who collect the information and then make sure that it's available in the right place will allow us to further scale up. Incentive hacking, I think everyone in crypto knows what it is about and thinks a lot about it, but actually at Maker we're surprisingly basic when it comes to incentive hacking. So to tie it to the previous topic, auditing and review, it can happen on different abstraction levels. Of course, we need to make sure that we don't resort to too much micromanagement. So you can ask yourself the very detailed question: how are people exactly doing their work? Are they working correctly? Are they following all the best practices? Do they show up in time? Do they follow project management practices, etc.? These kind of questions, sometimes they may be necessary, but they're very low level. They're very costly, because we really need to look into the details and process all that information. A more abstract question could be, what are they delivering? I don't care how they achieve their goals. Like, as long as they are delivering quality work, I don't care how they work. And yeah, we can push that one level further and then ask ourselves, I don't even care about the deliverables, as long as the higher level goals are met, right? So if there are these strategic initiatives, as a delegate, for example, maybe there is no need to look into the deliverables of the independent or the individual core units if you can just verify that the higher level goals of the initiatives are being met. And yeah, incentive hacking really tries to tap into as high as possible a level of that abstraction ladder, and ultimately wants to align everyone's intentions with the MTR numbers going up. It removes that need for auditing and review. That is, in a way, the big dream, to just put the right incentive in place and then have the whole thing run on autopilot. I do think incentive hacking will probably never replace the need for oversight altogether, but we can definitely do more to experiment with this. So potential is largely untapped, I think. We have direct DAO payments, so you're paid directly by the DAO as a core unit member. That is a clear incentive, and yeah, you also have an MTR bonus, so your success depends directly on the success of the MTR token, and so that obviously helps as incentive alignment. We have the delegate remuneration, which is partially dependent on the MTR holder support. At the moment, this relationship between the two is quite suppressed for maybe good reasons, but it does remove part of the incentive alignment. And there are only one or a few cases of profit sharing. So once again, Deco is an example here, but that one is maybe one that could be used a lot more often. So I do think more research and work is needed. Maker may want to experiment more in this area, and the idea of MakerDAOs that Rune is talking about, that one of course hinges very, very much on the magic of incentive hacking. And I think if we can make it work, it then really should be a superpower to scale up the DAO. Principle for documentation and education. I'm talking about this one a lot, so I'll just keep it very short. If you look at the different types of communication in the DAO, there's coordinating action, there's status reporting and evaluation. We talked about those. They're always very specific to the work that is needed. If you're building the governance portal, then you need to coordinate action around the governance portal. If you're reporting on, for example, the auction infrastructure, then someone needs to very specifically look into that particular topic. Knowledge transfer and training, however, is mostly general. So it doesn't matter who you are. It matters a little bit in terms of professional category and which processes you're involved in. But largely speaking, everyone is following the same processes and DAO. Everyone has the same body of knowledge that acts as the basis to do your work. And this is much more easily parallelizable, and I think this is something that we don't we don't use enough. So documentation and education, they parallelize training and knowledge transfer, but there's a few, and the examples that we talked about a lot in the past, Maker Academy, our incubation program is also very much shifting in the direction of just documentation and education, removing the need for individual training. And there is a documentation effort, I believe, spearheaded by GovAlpha that focuses on creating better documentation so that we don't need to have all these individual meetings. Possible improvement, I think we need to be more deliberate about what to document and which materials to create. The thing we need to keep in mind is that the maintenance cost must always be lower than the production cost of that documentation. If you spend a week writing documentation about something and then only one person reads it for half an hour, then you've lost most of that week of work. If that same documentation is used by 100 people, then you've saved a lot of time. So we need to optimize for that. And then last but not least, principle number 5 is automation. And this one I'm very excited about because I think we're at the point in MakerDAO where we can start really focusing on automation again. This is, when you're in software, this is the most obvious thing, but we somehow forget that it applies to MakerDAO as an organization. Examples to consider, of course, consider eBay, consider Amazon. These are marketplaces where the collaboration, the coordination between vendors on the one hand, between buyers on the other hand, is fully automated. Amazon has an extremely low cost when it comes to onboarding new vendors to their platform because everything is worked out. You don't need an Amazon person coming to you and explaining everything. The software, it takes you by the hand, and it shows you how the processes work, and they take you from the level of potentially a complete amateur to basically a professional. And there is not a person involved from the side of eBay or Amazon. Uber, Airbnb, same thing. Consider how much work it is to run a taxi company if you don't use Uber. Consider how much work it is to run a hotel and market it if you weren't using Airbnb. These tools, they they implement processes and they make that switch from a bunch of processes and knowledge and like trainings that need to happen. They just create an app, and you create an account on the app, and then any amateur, maybe not any amateur, but most amateurs will be able to just use the app and then become a professional overnight, as it were, by using and following the processes that are explained to them, not through lectures or something, but through the features of the app. One example that I particularly like is Steam. Steam is a gaming platform, so if you have an account as a user, you have access to a huge catalog of games, and then you can buy the games and then play them. This is another example of a collaboration, coordination network that has been all but fully automated. So as a game developer, it has become so much easier to do your job because it's gross simplification, but almost becoming a game developer, it almost becomes as easy as creating a Steam account and then start to use the platform, using its features, using its practices to communicate with your users. So really, I do think that for Maker, it's time to start putting the A back in the DAO, make it truly, if not autonomous, then automated. I do think things have settled down enough to start automating a lot more. We have all these processes that are defined in the MIPS. Well, these are practically specifications for software that is waiting to be written. So we need to turn these processes into software. We need to, instead of thinking of a MIP change, we might start thinking of a new feature release instead. And yeah, I do believe this is already happening to some extent. For example, with the voting portal, there are some process changes that were simply governance portal feature releases. And I do hope that we can push that in the coming months and years, I guess, to a much higher level. So we need to separate the automation goal from the permissionless goal. I think that is one of the confusions that maybe hold us back a little. Not everything needs to be a permissionless smart contract. We need to tap into good old-fashioned normal automation by writing a software platform and yeah, capitalizing on that. So my final hope for today is that we can make MakerDAO participation as easy as creating a new account on our MakerDAO collaboration platform. And with that, I'll end it here. So thank you for listening.
Nice. Thank you. Great.
I know it was.
We do have. Oh,
Mhm.
is my microphone okay, or?
It is.
Okay, great. Yeah, now I was going to say we do have one question from Elpro. So the question is a two-part question. The first one is in regards to focus. Can you please reiterate the role of a facilitator when it comes to providing the core unit with the overall strategic imperatives and making sure every team member understands them and how the work they perform fits into creating value?
So I'll take that question again. So the role of the facilitator when it comes to providing their core unit with the overall strategic imperatives. Yeah. So this is a matter of internal communication. Yeah, I think one of the things that we should probably do more is that the facilitator, I think, should become even more a wall almost. And in certain respects, this is not a good thing, right? So we want to be careful with it. But when it comes to information overload, the facilitator should be a firewall between the DAO and the team, I think. Many teams are distracted a lot by all the noise that is happening in the DAO. And this is something that the facilitator, I believe, should see as their responsibility to filter that and to make it unnecessary when it comes to just executing tasks for individual team members to directly communicate with governance. So the facilitators, they are also responsible for the core unit mandate and the strategy there. So they would basically figure out how these two go together. So you have the feedback, the noise, the input from the DAO. You have the strategy of the core unit, and it's the facilitator's role, I believe, to synthesize that and to bring a clear picture to the core unit team members, so that they can focus on executing their work.
Right, and in a way, we had this. These conversations when, for example, offboarding a core unit where we said, oh, but there were some talented people in that core unit, should we save them? Or for example, if a facilitator didn't pay one of these contributors, should the DAO step up and save them? And the very purist and maybe libertarian answer is no, we should not, because the DAO does not have kind of like an agreement with each contributor. It's not with the core unit and the facilitator. So it's a bit up to the contributor to set up these agreements and safeguards with each core unit. But on the other hand, you don't want to ruin MakerDAO's reputation at a broad level. So you have a bit the dichotomy. I think that one thing that we should make clear is, and this will come with automation, but once that it's super easy for anyone to create their own core unit and make sure that they get onboarded. If talented people think that they have what it takes and the talent, then it should be very easy for them to get onboarded into the DAO.
Yeah, absolutely. And providing those tools, as I said, I do think the processes that they've been well enough defined now. We have a better idea what works, what doesn't work. So we can really start thinking about how do we now turn this into a software platform that, yeah, as you say, makes it as easy. So joining a DAO should be as easy as creating an account, joining the team, and then the software would hold your hand to follow all the right processes. The DAO can play that role of like supporting the internal functioning of the core unit, make it really easy. And then that also means that you can give them a lot of freedom, because if it's really easy, then 95% of the people are just going to follow the easy way. If they do deviate, then they probably have good reasons. So by making it really easy, you actually create also some kind of a voluntary compliance function, as it were.
Flipping to the other side of the coin and talking about this. So the second part of the question from Frank is, who should be responsible for demanding quality in order to deliver a winning product whenever sandboxing, cross-core unit interactions, etc.?
Yeah. So with the different principles that we've discussed, I think first of all, you would try and, as much as possible, avoid the need to even do that. If you can put a really strong incentive in place, if the core unit is purely driven by profit share, for example, then it might not be needed to do a lot of oversight, because if they succeed, then it's good for MakerDAO. If they don't, then it's automatically not a cost for MakerDAO as well. But that is most of the time a little utopian. So it's very rare that you can find the perfect incentive to do that. The next thing, when we look at scalability of the DAO, I don't think the delegates have the bandwidth today, let alone will have the bandwidth in the future if the DAO scales further up, to do the quality control. And that's where the information abstraction, I think, really comes in play, because the question as a delegate that you should ask yourself, like, what is the exact information that I need to make my decisions? And then someone else should provide you with that information, right? And I personally think that you could just use the same model that we already have for core units. So you create a new core unit, which has a quality control and auditing function. For example, you would have a core unit that is specialized in reviewing software. And when a production core unit or a product development core unit, when they deliver a new release of their software, the software review core unit would review that release. And as I said, this is massively parallelizable. This is one of those embarrassingly parallelizable problems, because you don't have to limit yourself to just one software review core unit. You can just create as many as needed. So I think that is a model that would work well. Have a review core unit, and then they abstract the information and present it in the exact way the delegates need to make their decisions. And maybe our performance dashboard can help there as a platform to publish that information.
Yeah, that's good. So there are no more questions about it, but maybe you can quickly comment on the resilience initiative from SES. We had the kickoff call yesterday for anyone that doesn't know, and the video will be available on our YouTube channel very, very soon. But maybe you can give like a 1 minute summary of what it is and what we're trying to solve and do.
Yeah, the resiliency initiative does two things. So MakerDAO really moved from a logic of abundance when the DAO was just starting up, when there was enough money to fund all the good ideas from everyone, to a model of scarcity, because the expenses are approaching the profits. So we need to start thinking where to allocate the now scarce resources. And the problem, so we can think of a whole bunch of improvements to make the DAO more resilient when we're unsure about the financial future, but also operationally. And this is the first part of the initiative. So how can we improve the infrastructure of the DAO to make sure that if a big market downturn happens, that not everything disintegrates, but we can continue to operate. We have the plans for that laid out. We have the infrastructure in place to deal with that. As I said, it's all about allocating scarce resources and prioritization and making hard choices, in other words. And the additional challenge is that you can't really make those hard choices if you don't have a good vision and strategy in place. Because if there are 3 great core unit ideas, which one should you fund? If you don't have a strategy and vision, then there really isn't a good answer. If you do have a strategy and vision, then you compare it to which of those ideas would contribute the most to your strategy and vision, and then you pick that one. So it's needed when we have to make these hard choices to have a clear picture of what that strategy and vision is. We are a decentralized organization, so there may be conflicting or competing views about what that vision and strategy should look like. And that is the second leg of the initiative. So we will work with delegates and other stakeholders to create an overview of the different visions and strategies that exist among the delegates, and try to cluster them. So delegates that are more aligned, try to quantify that and make it clear which delegates agree more and which delegates disagree with each other a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I don't see any more questions also in the chat. So yeah, I think that was good. It was quite thorough. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, as always. If I don't say this, Sarah will kill me. But check our YouTube channel and MakerDAO network. SES.MakerDAO network is our website where we try to summarize this information. And thanks everyone for being here. Have a nice one.
Thanks everyone.